What do you prioritize more? People liking you or your life's purpose? If you knew you could have everything you wanted if you just believed, would you take the first step or wait another 10 years? Here on the SDR&R podcast, we tackle everything holding us back.
I'm a boss who a worker, bitch. I make bloody moves.
I'm a worker, bitch. I make money moves. Woo! Cardi B. So good, man. So good. I feel like, obviously that's a hip hop song, but I do feel like that's the most rock and roll shit that I've ever heard. Yeah, when I first heard that song, that track, I about lost it. I was like, this is some good stuff right here. All right, so we're gonna dive right in. This week, we're talking about the difference between being an employer and an employee. Boy, there are a lot of differences. When I wake up every morning and whenever I face what I'm first seeing and perceiving as a problem, I gotta ask myself, am I responding to this occurrence as an employer or an employee? Are you being a boss or are you being a worker? It is so important that you make this distinction and decide, given our podcast name, what you're gonna do. How you want to be, how do you want to respond to the world that, the life that's given to you. There's a mentality for both of these types of being, right? There's an employee mentality and there's a boss mentality. They're very different. So the employee mentality to me started really in the, sweatshops, assembly lines. This was all, Adam Smith, good old Adam Smith, love the guy, came up with the division of labor and, that inspired really the Industrial Revolution. So people would, instead of doing, his whole division of labor was that if you're making pens, like fountain pens, it's something like 5 or 10 times faster if you have 5 workers doing each of the 5 individual tasks that it takes to put a fountain pen together, right? Versus having one guy or 5 guys that each make their own pens from start to finish, okay? So this was game changing. This completely changed the economics of, labor and work. But what that gave us was this very robotic lifestyle and mindset. If you're on an assembly line and you're not working from start to finish on a given project, right? So, Henry Ford invented the assembly line based on what Adam Smith taught us. And that just gave everybody one minute task divided among, 100 different tasks that it took to put together the Model T, for example. And you would just repetitively and robotically do that task. Oh, boring, right? So you go to the assembly line, it's hot, you're sweaty, that's why they call it a sweatshop, And at this time, this was the first time that we'd seen factories like this. So, working conditions was like not a thing. Work-life balance was not a thing back in the 1800s when this started, or the early 1900s. So you would go to your job, you would do this thing, and you would repeat it day in and day out, hours in and hours out, just constantly doing this one thing. And we developed, I think, culturally, among most of us, not all of us, but we developed this new mindset culture, which was counting hours. I know it's stupid hearing the lawyer bitching about counting hours, but that's really how it was, right? So what is an individual's value in terms of how much work they can produce in a given hour, which seems kind of like Jean-Paul Sartre would say, annihilation, right? Because you're taking this unique individual, this human being with all of their feelings and their passions and their creativity and their drive and their ability to love and be loved and exist in the world, and you're stripping that all away, and all that you're left with is how good of a robot are they, right? How good can they do this thing for this in this amount of time? How many widgets can they put together in an 8-hour workday, right? So that's where we came up with full time. Full-time was not a thing before that. People were paid more on like a project basis in a sense, right? So you would work tons of hours during the harvest if you were a farmer, but you would work very little hours like in the winter because there's really not much to do. There's still a bunch of farming to do, but it's not nearly as much as when you're harvesting what you have sown, no pun intended. We developed this whole full-time culture and thing and mindset, and I think when your value is based on your ability to repeat this one simple robotic task as much as possible in a given, factory, then you too participate in stripping away with your own individuality and creativity, because what choice do you have? Like you kind of need to go into like a meditative trance state almost, and I don't mean this in a great way necessarily, because you're like switching off your brain, you're switching off your ability to create and think and feel, and you just become this robot, this cheap labor. So we have continued with that mindset, and now I would call it the employee mindset. So let's get a little more into the employee mindset. The employee mindset is such that, things happen in the world and we are very reactive. Okay, so we don't bring our own choice into play. Instead, we just react. It's snap reactions, usually not very good ones. We just react. That's right. So an employee mindset, I think, in these days would be somebody that, wakes up and immediately checks their phone, goes into like social media for their, news or whatever, and throw themselves into a tailspin of emotional and psychological reactivity. Right? So we take our cues from these news outlets, from social media, if it's Facebook or whatever. We take our cues from that and we react in the way that media source wants us to react. Right? So we're literally like programmed. Okay? We have a choice in this, though. You have a choice, all of us do, to not pick up the phone. Man, when you first wake up in the morning, you should not be looking at your phone. Your brain is the most, vulnerable. It's the most sponge-like. It's going to suck in whatever you put in front of your mind, because you're coming out of literally a dream state. Like you're raw. When you first wake up in the morning, your body prepares itself for the whole day, and it naturally maps out how your day is going to be and how you're going to spend that time. So this employee mindset often will react to the things around it and instead of planning. So I would say differently from that, a boss mentality makes the choice themselves. So when they wake up, they don't look at their phones. They think, what do I got to do today? How am I going to plan today? How am I going to make today great? What needs to be done? What am I concerned about? What did my subconscious kind of bring up for me last night as I dreamt and slept that is important to me now? How did my intuition show up? What am I missing, right? So we get to, and we talked about this on an earlier podcast about, Descartes and Hume and all of these philosophers, but we choose the reality that we experience. I don't know if we actually choose reality in a manifestation type of way or not, but it is absolutely the truth. We know it for sure that we choose the reality that we live and perceive. Very oftentimes, if somebody's in kind of a victim mode, they're sacrificing their freedom and ability to make decisions and choose what they want and what they want to see and what they are going to ignore, and not tolerate and let go and on, right? So instead of that mindset, you can have a boss mindset, right? Which immediately when you become conscious for that day, this is not hyperbole, right? You literally become conscious that day, and then you have the opportunity to choose your life. You get to choose your day. Why the fuck did you wake up in the morning? What are you here to do? What is your job? Do your job. What is your job? Okay? And the job, I guess that doesn't really work with this whole theory of this podcast, but the job that you choose for yourself. As a boss, you will choose your own jobs, right? And you might choose your jobs for other people. Cardi B in that song, explicit as it is, she's saying, hey, I'm a boss, you're a worker. She's saying, I'm going to choose my life, right? I'm going to, I make money moves. I no longer make like dance moves. I think she's commenting on having been a stripper. She's saying, look, I make investments, I make choices, I make decisions for myself like a boss that grants me the freedom, the success, and the money that I want and deserve. It's so rock and roll, like so much attitude and swagger. You get to the raison d'etre. We talk about this often, but that's your reason for being. It's this great French philosophy, right? It's like, why do you get up in the morning? Okay, so what are you here to do? That sort of thing. An employee mindset, a worker mindset, a assembly line mindset, like we said, is reactive. Okay, so things happen to you and you are a victim to whatever is going on, and you make yourself a victim. And I don't mean this to be harsh, but and I've done this. I mean, hundreds of millions of times, I'm sure, but I have also learned to not do this any longer. I have learned to not react. I've learned to take a pause, to take a duration between when a stimulus happens to me, something happens, in the world, right? I notice it, I look at it, I feel my emotional body like reacting and wanting to play victim or whatever. Maybe get a bunch of sympathy from people who are like, oh, I understand, like it's so hard, oh my God, like that sucks, I'm here for you. Fuck all that noise, and I step back, I look at it objectively, and I think to myself, where is the opportunity here? Where is it? Because I guarantee there is an opportunity here. And that's really the core, I think, of the boss-ass mindset. You come at the world knowing, you have this faith that there is always an opportunity hidden from our view in what we would otherwise react to as a victim. I don't want to be a victim. Like, life's too short, I mean, shit happens. Yeah, totally. But, great and brilliant things happen too. There was this guy, this client of mine that actually, it was hilarious. We were talking last week. He was going to sell this company. He'd had this company for like 20 years, and he had this plan, to sell his company, late last year, late in 2021. And he was going to take all of the money from that sale and invest it. Okay? So if he, like in stocks and bonds, the deal fell through. And at the time the deal fell through, we were like, hey, this is an opportunity, because the first reaction that we had was like, oh, this sucks, this is terrible. But then when we really thought about it, we're like, we may not see it just yet, but there's an opportunity here. Then the stock market crashed, and literally, his portfolio, he would have lost like 30% in stocks had he invested all of that money, right? So there's no way that would have been successful for him. Isn't that interesting? So it's great, that he didn't make the sale of his company then. Now he gets to sell it and time the market so that he can, invest now, and all the stocks are at a discount. I mean, they're like corrected nowadays, right? So that's great. So there's the opportunity, right? The opportunity, it was better for him by far to not do what he thought he ought to do. That's just one example, but there's always an opportunity. So what does a boss mindset look like, where we choose our own life, we choose our own freedom, we take time between when something happens, the stimulus, and when we have a response to that stimulus. It is not a knee-jerk, dumbass reaction. Instead, it's an action, a reaction that takes a duration, and you can think about, how does this change my industry? How does this change culturally? Where's the market going to shift? Where's the opportunity in that? So a boss mindset, to me, is actually different from, Adam Smith's, right? So you need to go back to sort of the prior, where we look at things as a Renaissance man, and it should be Renaissance women too, because obviously women kick ass. But this older mindset before, that predated Adam Smith and all of those guys, those philosophers, John Locke and them, before the division of labor, there was the mindset of the Renaissance man. The Renaissance man knew things that were all inclusive. Okay, so a doctor back in those days was not divided. It wasn't just a doctor of like a surgeon, or just a philosopher, or just a general medicine doctor, or just a lawyer, or just on and on and on. Back then, if you had a doctorate, you knew everything that we had to teach, practically. So almost all of human knowledge was given and taught to these Renaissance men doctors. Okay? So you had to have a doctorate in philosophy. You had to have a doctorate in religious studies. You had to have a doctorate in medicine. You had to have a doctorate in the law. So all of these things went together, and you might choose a vocation, that didn't incorporate or utilize all of the other things that you knew. But if you were a doctor, you were learned, okay? So you looked at things objectively, and you could pull from philosophy and psychology to help out your medical practice. You could pull from your medical practice and things you knew to help out your legal practice. If you were a lawyer, you could pull from your theological studies and philosophical studies, right? All of this would pool together. So we had an amazing worldview. We had so much data points. We could see things from all of these different perspectives, but then we divided because of, I think, Adam Smith's, division of labor, which works great for like robots and putting together tasks like manufacturing. It works great in the manufacturing industry, but it's not so great in the other professions, I don't think. Because when you specialize and you niche and you splinter off into factions where you only know about this one tiny tunnel vision thing, you can only see this one little tunnel. You have tunnel vision. You can just see a tiny version of the whole picture, unless you're giving yourself time to step back and not react, right? So the more reactive you are, the less of the total picture you're going to see, and you sure as shit are not going to see opportunities when bad things happen to you. So I want to say this too. There are bosses that don't own businesses and don't have any employees, and there are employees that own businesses that are not bosses. It is very common for a professional, for example, to set up their own business, and I'm putting this in air quotes, and then think that they're being a boss, but they're actually not. So very oftentimes people will just leave whatever job or get fired that they have, and then they continue to do that job for a few customers, and they're really just going through the motions, continuing that role as if they were still an employee, as if they still worked for somebody else. It's just that now the boss is like an amalgamation of a bunch of customers rather than a single person that's, giving the marching orders. The problem with that business is going to be that they're not looking at it objectively. They're kind of living reactively, and, they're just going through the motions. It is important to work in your business some, but I'd say it's just as important, if not more so, to work on your business objectively outside of your business. So you got a plan. Listen to the podcast 2 weeks ago. You got that we did on taking care of business, right? So you got a forecast. Think of what your next 10-year goal is, your 3-year goal is, your 1-year goal is. And if you break that back, what's the breadcrumb trail in 3 months? And if you break that back, what's the breadcrumb trail for, 1 month? And then 1 week and 1 day, and then even by the hour when you're setting down your daily grind, your daily work. That is thinking with a boss mentality. that is looking into the future, projecting into the future, making that shit happen the way that you want to make it, rather than simply reacting to all of the stuff that happens to you that you're, not at all in control of, that you can't influence, right? Or use to your advantage. So I'd say a lot, and I get this thousands of clients that I've spoken with as a business lawyer, coaching them. They really need to get out of their business. They need to work in their business less and work on their business more strategically and all of that. So that's how you get a business owner that's really with a reactive employee mindset. And separately, it doesn't take a business. You don't have to have a business to be a boss. In fact, all of my employees, they come at life this way, and I absolutely love them for that. When they wake up in the morning, they plan their day. We're all encouraged to say, okay, what's my grind today? What do we need to take care of? So they're self-led. These are the 5 things that I'm going to do today. This is how I'm going to knock it out of the park. And this matches up with our forecasted goals for the next week, the next month, the next quarter, the next year, the next 3 years, and 10 years, right? That's how they're thinking. So you don't have to be a boss to be a boss, so to speak, okay? You can still live with freedom and choice and your own passion and creating the life that you want to live. You can still work on yourself. You can still strategically forecast into your desires in the future that you want. Just to recap, are you an employee or are you a boss? You don't have to own a business to be a boss. A lot of employees are bosses too. So there's an employee mindset that was largely created in from Adam Smith with the division of labor, which we talked about. That's the assembly line worker. You're literally stripping your passions, desires, choice, thinking, emotions, creativity, your intuition, your relationships even, all of that gets thrown out the door, and you become this little tiny robot that just does this small, unique task over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, ad nauseum. That is an employee mindset. Employee mindset, people wake up in the morning and they constantly react. They don't have a choice with how they want to live their day, a choice with what they want to live their lives doing, what they want to perceive. They're not creating the reality that they perceive. They're having it spoon-fed to them because, understandably, that can be very comforting. I mean, you feel like a baby, but that's just, that opens you up. It makes you vulnerable to be manipulated by other people, media, politicians, narcissists. I mean, people are cruel and they will take advantage of that vulnerability. Different from that, like Cardi B said, I don't dance anymore, I make money moves. Fucking great, right? Boss mindset people look at it like a Renaissance man or woman would back in those days, right? Which means you are holistically coming at everything that happens to you, looking at it from a philosophical standpoint, a social commentary standpoint, a professional state. Back then it was, everybody was a doctor. They had, they understood the law and politics and how all of these things worked. They came at it from those perspectives. And I'm not saying that we all need to go get a degree in all of these disciplines, but I'm saying that you need to as well look at these things that happen to you objectively. So how does that happen? Well, a stimulus happens, your knee-jerk reaction, you might feel it arising in your spine to like freak out and react to it. You delay that reaction, okay? So you step back, you take some deep breaths, then you maybe you write it down, but you look at it objectively and you give yourself a duration, you give yourself enough time to think about what are the opportunities here? How do I want to respond, not react, respond to this thing that happened? How does this change my prior projections? How does this, what decisions do I get to make to appropriately respond to this stimulus? All right, guys, thanks for listening. That's all the time we got. I'm Jonathan Sparks with Sparks Law. If you want to check us out on jonathansparksmusic.com, we've got all my music coming out with some new music this month. Really exciting. And keep rocking and rolling, guys. If you enjoyed this podcast and you want to hear more, check us out on jonathansparksmusic.com, JONATHAN sparksmusic.com. Please like and subscribe. Tell a friend to tell a friend. We love you guys. We'll talk soon.